8. The next night, they talk about how things will be different for her. This tiny safe room is their own little world. It is just a 10 by 10 box which barely fits all they need. They discuss the things she needs to know about the hunt itself, distractions of the hunt, the blood during the hunt, the consequences of the hunt. Much is discussed. Her mind has no issues with biting someone's neck for blood, and that it is the only thing she'll need anymore, as long as she can stand it. They also discuss possibilities of finding some that like being fed upon, having some people to protect, and help as needed. He does tell her that animal blood works, but it isn't the same, and it is much harder to chase down, except for deals with butchers, but those are hard to compete with others like them. She thinks for nearly 20 seconds before asking a question, or making a statement, wanting to impress him. She noticed that he smiled when she thought more than asked specific questions. In Zook's mind, Patricia has a calm, analytical mind. She thinks of many different scenarios, and many options that can and often do happen. Getting caught and thrown in jail, caught and killed, questions she asks calmly, a tone as though she expects this sort of thing to happen, and she wants to plan for each contingency. This is a very different conversation than with Tina not so long ago. Most of the basic rules are discussed after they woke up without teeth in their shoulders. The basic rules are, don't get caught while feeding, humans can't know of us, don't create many new vampires, and do not leave a broken or empty body to be found. Most of the rumors, garlic, can't cross running water, no reflection, and can't walk into a human's home without permission, they were all fake, set in rumor long ago to try to help us blend in. The staking thing came out a long while ago. It is a paralyzing effect, but it certainly is an easy way to stop one of us. Those are very dangerous. The sun and fire are bad. He tells her she will not tan, she will crisp enough to smoke other meat in a barbecue. Patricia easily understands the consequences of each, and they barely need to be explained. The rest of the world doesn't exist, and barely matters that first night. They spend much time talking. She asks him about many things of his past, that he is not comfortable talking about, and he asks more about her life. She didn't think of any of it as even remotely interesting compared to his life, yet he still wanted to hear about it. He latches onto each detail, listens to each day of what she considers her boring life. In her life, she woke up each morning and made her morning toast with real butter and whatever else to add, sometimes some eggs on the weekend. The most interesting parts of her life were when she is being out of the ordinary for a regular accountant, the stuff with the kooky 50. He certainly enjoyed most of it, even the mundane mornings of buttered toast. After unknown hours of thinking and talking, Patricia quietly and shyly asks,
"Can I have more of your blood tonight?"
They were still leaning towards each other, close enough to kiss, but that isn't on either of their minds. Zook said,
"What, did you want to ruin another one of my shirts?"
"Not if you take it off first,"
she says innocently. Without request, her hands shake slightly as she begins to unbutton the few buttons of his polo shirt he has on for the night, since she ruined his last shirt the night before, tearing into it with her teeth. Her bluntness is refreshing, but he knows she wouldn't have asked that sort of question to anyone else, even nights ago if she was messing around with some stranger from a bar. He obliges her, sliding his light blue polo shirt slowly up his body over his head. By the time he has his shirt over his head, she is removing hers as well, pulling it over her head awkwardly while still laying down as they have been for the past few hours, barely moving after both of them woke up this night. Neither of them is displeased with what they see under their shirts. They couldn't help but look up and down at each other, from their vantage points, lying on the beds. Patricia wasn't some beauty queen out of current celebrity fantasy, but he brushes the hair out of her face so she could see his smile as he looks down. During his days, women were not so focused on their figure, and he never really focused on such things either. She innocently turns her head so that as he looked down, she didn't want to see his reaction. She has breasts that lean down slightly as she lay on her side, but not heavily. She has a small curve to her stomach, but it just showed that it isn't important to her. He can tell from her looking back at him, that her body didn't embarrass her, and it has no reason to. She smiles back at him as well, checking his upper body from her vantage point on the bed. Zook wouldn't consider himself some hard-bodied, mountain muscle of a vampire out of fantasy. He has a little curve to his gut himself, if men could have curves, and it wouldn't be fair if he compared her body to that of a supermodel. His lightly haired stomach and chest were on display, not enough to be unclean, but enough to show he has some years on him before his transformation. She asks him about his hair, to ask if he needed to cut it, and he shakes his head and puts a finger on her lips. This isn't a time for questions. She wants to feel his muscles though, and she feels like she doesn't need to ask. His muscles feel like they become more rigid to her touch. She runs her hand slowly up from his stomach to his chest, then over his collarbone where she bit in the night before. His body shivers, then she moves her hand down his arm to his wrist. He smiles from the sensation. He mimicked her gestures with his hand. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery after all. Bringing his hand about the same way up from her stomach, between her breasts, slightly moving one gently, with his fingers, she allows him to do as she did. As his fingers brush her breast leaning downward, she feels her skin tense where she lets him caress her. His hand continues up to her neck, then over her shoulder that he bit into that same night. Her body shivers, as his did. He tells her to lie back and extend her arm over his mouth, and he would do the same. Their arms would be between them awkwardly, but it would be better this way. This would not be a usual way to feed on others, but a mutual blood drinking like this is a way for them both to be comfortable and experience the whole feeling of the mutual blood taste. He tells her to bite him first so that she would be ready, and she didn't hesitate long. She bites into his wrist. The strange feeling that she would need to get used to, still shivers down her back with the sensation. He feels the pain for a second or two, but then the euphoria kicks in. The feeling of a short loss of his own blood makes him quiver, and worry in the back of his mind, but the other source of blood right in front of him, her wrist, lightens that fear. He takes her wrist in his hand and bites into it, a lighter sensation, instead of being aggressive as he usually needs to bring to bear when getting blood. He hears her light moan, and her teeth pull back from his wrist for a couple of seconds, but she pulls it right back to her mouth, not wanting to spill a drop. She drinks a bit from him, he drinks a bit from her, each rolling the taste of their blood around in their mouths. It isn't a coppery taste to them, each sliver of the other's blood hits their tongue like a savory jolt, or as a pop, like slightly sugary dark chocolate, melting directly on their taste buds. The sensation they get from each other is different than the night before. Pat barely remembers what happened the night before. She is much more in control than that night. She can actually enjoy what comes from him, and vice versa. His blood slowly flows into her mouth, and as she pulls his wrist to her lips to not let any spill out, it feels like a full 3-course meal and favorite dessert, that she didn't know she must have. As she swallows it, bit by bit, she feels like her body needs little else than this. His blood trickling down her throat sends a shock down her spine as it travels down. She feels like she is getting a massage from the stream flowing down. Her body relaxes onto the bed, and she feels the hard texture of the mat without any concentration. Zook has tasted blood from hundreds of others over his time, not just drank, but tasted. He did not often drink another vampire's blood though. It is true, he is partially taking advantage of her here, but that is in the back of his mind. The innocence of this new blood, that is actually more mixed with his, but vampiric blood is thicker than a human's water of life. This ignition they get from each other continues their fueled desire to make themselves whole, with a part of the other. The yin and yang, of losing a part of themselves, and getting it back from the other, is a sort of affirmation of what they want, from each other. Being naked would be artificial in what they wanted from the other that night. Zook finishes his desired fill from Patricia, and he pulls back his teeth, licking her wrist to close the punctures. She feels some sort of cue from that, and pulls her teeth back from his wrist as well, licking his wrist clean in the same fashion. They relax their heads down on their uncomfortable beds, now in most ways, satiated with each other. They relax their wrists on the other, plopping them on their lips, then lazily lowering them to their necks. They both laugh at their mirroring actions. Patricia feels as fulfilled as ever, like she just ate a large holiday meal, and just wants to take a nap. She asks,
I feel so worn out, but I'm just now realizing I'm not breathing heavily. Oh, I'm not breathing at all. It is a terrible but intriguing sensation. Man, this feels so good. Do vampires do this all the time?
Not really, this is pretty much a first for me. I have not made many other vampires, and this wouldn't be a thing I would usually do.
It looks like Patricia uses a lot of energy to have to roll on her side. With a quizzical look in her eyes, she asks,
What do you mean?
Zook rolls to his side with a little effort himself, answering,
Well, when I have created a few over time, I have shared my blood, shown them the rules and a few things along the way over a week maybe, we separate and sleep in different places, and they hunt after a bit without me. I haven't been a part of this sort of relationship. Your circumstance has brought you to me in need of help, and I'm happy to have helped, for once. You hit me in just the right way.
He finishes with a smile that she catches. She lowers her head down, covering her eyes with her hands. He moves the few strands of hair out of her face that are in the way. She shimmies her body across the small bed up over the median, and wraps an arm over his body, leaning towards him, feeling her chest against his. His arm reaches down around her waist and she pulls her hips more against his. Her head is pushing against his chest, and his is over her head, she asks.
My life is a mess. I'm not sure what is going to happen with my job. I might be in danger going back. Can you please help me?
Reluctantly, he pulls his body back a bit from hers in the bed, and puts his finger under her chin, and raises her head to meet his eyes.
I will do everything I can to get your life back in order, and we can figure things out, together.
She nods and pulls herself closer again. He states,
We've been together most of the night. One reason why vampires do not do this very often, is that they cannot get extra blood from this sort of fun. Our bodies use a small amount of our blood to give us the strength to wake for the night. Since I'd rather keep you where we know you will likely be okay, I will go out and hunt for us both and be full so that you can feed on me until we know you will be alright. I will need to introduce you to the boss in town, and she will be happy to meet you. You'll eventually get used to feeding and hunting. I can't feed you long term, you'll think of a few options. Going to bars, old friends, your boss.
Her eyes lighten up, and she smiles at the prospect of the idea.
I'm kidding. You should never do that. You can do a job overnight, and as long as we get things cleared up, you make decent money doing that. People you work with, maybe, but not your boss.
She frowns at that proclamation, and it makes his smile sink to a frown as well. She asks,
Can you help me set things up with the boss to do what I need late at night, instead of during the day?
Usually I would charge for that sort of thing. Some have done it within the city, and it is a pain to do that for everyone, but since you have been transformed by me, it is fair to help you for free.
He says with a wink. He didn't feel great about things. Vampires bond to each other through sharing of their blood, her feeding from him, and vice versa. She is brand new, and he created her. Sometimes, especially at the beginning, this sort of thing happens. It often made it very difficult for children of older vampires to disrespect, or even come close to hurting their creators. It is a bit late, or early, for them to do anything other than lie there, and do a little more chatting. Both of them come up with different subjects about their lives. Having just drunk their fill, and the emotional dump hitting them so hard, they fall asleep calmly yet again. That day, they sleep wrapped in each other, close by, for the comfort they want.